Hiya BookTube. Welcome to another Middlemarch meditation where we cover Chapter 5, pages 43 to 45, possibly a bit of page 46, just a little bit to get to a natural break in the scene. Okay, but before we get started, trigger warning. If you are watching this while you're enjoying something to eat or drink, you'll need to make a judgment call, right? Whether you can stomach the next few minutes where we talk about the epigraph which opens chapter 5. If you're uncertain, you can mute the sound and fast forward to the point where I change this background photograph. That will be your signal that we've moved beyond any material that might undermine good digestion. Okay, for those brave souls who are still listening, Eliot begins chapter 5 with a chapter from Burton's a chapter, just a passage, right? She doesn't get that ambitious. A passage from Burton's famous 17th century work, of course, because Middlemarch has a fixation with that period of English history. When I first saw the quote, I thought, hey, I know Burton. I used Burton's book to write a university essay about melancholy when I was studying Shakespeare's comedy As You Like It. But that turned out to be Dr. Timothy Byte's book. There were a lot of books about melancholy in the 17th century. Make of that what you will, right? But I needed it to talk about the character of Jacques, which I've mentioned before. The melancholy Jacques, as he's called by his friends, or as he puts it, I can suck melancholy out of a song like a weasel sucks eggs. You just know you're going to like a guy like that. Now, you can never be sure, when you're talking on a BookTube video, whether you're speaking to an audience who needs context or doesn't. So if you already have a working understanding of the Greek humoral system, I'm just going to put a picture up here. If this is old hat to you, then, I'm not going to get boring. I am going to put a link in the description box to a video that talks through the whole theory of humors that goes back to ancient Greece and gives you a bit of history as well. And then we can go straight to the point, which is that melancholia was anecdotally associated with people who like to be alone, indoors a lot, sedentary, and inclined to intellectual pursuits. Just between me and you, I think the epigraph was chosen deliberately to make readers start the chapter feeling a little queasy. Yeah, there's nothing about illness in the whole of chapter 5. However, probably in the next meditation, we will notice how Celia's unpleasant reaction to some news, and the epigraph has the effect of encouraging our sympathy with her, to be fair. So let's read this epigraph. Let us get this up on screen. Bear with me 2 ticks. You see, I keep thinking I'm going to get fast at this, and then, no, you still have to wait a bit while I bring this up on screen. There we go. Here's page 43, and if I can just stretch this a little, because I really would like to focus on that epigraph. Hard students are commonly troubled with, I'm going to start giving you medical definitions now, right? Gouts. Well, that's my surname, so I know a fair bit about gout, even though I've never suffered from it. But it is buildup of uric acid, right? And you get swelling in your feet. My father used to get it. It's not very nice to look at. Definitely not very nice to look at. Catarrhs. Okay, well, we all know what catarrh is. And rheums, that's basically, things in your lungs, not breathing very well. But here's some words that they weren't familiar to me, so I had to look them up, right? Cachexia, which is extreme weight loss and muscle wasting. We can see it in people who are suffering from terminal cancer. Bradyspepsia is slowness of digestion. And then colic, we think of it in babies, but basically colic in the 19th century, it meant any kind of sudden, sharp abdominal pain. In the 18th and 19th century, it was more of a problem for women because their day wear included corsets, which were constricting the middle of their bodies. So they often had a great deal of difficulty with the normal function of their digestive system because it had to be squished all together by contraptions made of whalebone and laces. Then you've got crudities. Now that is, I'm sorry everyone, undigested food sitting in the stomach. Okay. Opulations, that is an obstruction of the lower intestine, and then we've got vertigo, winds, consumptions, and all such diseases as come by over much sitting. I suppose it'd be interesting to read a list in a more modern book, because of course there are plenty of modern books saying, we're too sedentary nowadays, and maybe they would list some very similar stuff. Over much sitting. They are, that is, the hard students are for the most part lean, dry, ill-coloured, and all through immoderate pains and extraordinary studies. If you will not believe the truth of this, look upon great Tostatus and Thomas Aquinas' works, and tell me whether those men took pains. Now, we don't know whether Burton actually knew that either Thomas Aquinas or, I had to look him up, Tostatus is Alonso Tostado, or his full name, Alfonso Fernandez de Madrigal, okay? And he was a Spanish theologian. So obviously both men were theologians. Both men probably spent a great deal of time indoors, and their works will testify that they weren't stupid. Whether they had any of these medical conditions, I could not find anything online to confirm one way or another. But my personal feeling is the reason we're subjected to that lovely paragraph is it's just, it doesn't make you feel pleasant when you finish it. Even those of you with strong stomachs, and you're still here, or I can't. Even so, do you not agree with me that you get to the end of the paragraph and you're a bit sort of, Okay, welcome back to everyone who took a little break for the sake of their digestion. We have dealt with the epigraph, and now we are going to go on into the chapter itself. I think it's important, before I read Mr. Casaubon's letter, to point out that a proposal in writing, a marriage proposal, may seem a little aloof and distant now, but it wouldn't have been uncommon in the 1830s. I may be preaching to the choir right now. As I've said, this is always a difficulty with BookTube. You never know who's going to have a doctorate in Victorian social history and be watching you sort of half bored thinking, get on with it, I know all this. Letter writing was so important in the 18th and 19th century. In England, the frequency of the postal service varied a bit. In the late 19th century, I've seen estimates for London at between 7 and 12 deliveries per day, but that's London. The Royal Mail Service during the 1830s, which is when Middlemarch is set, they would only open up a rural post office if it was receiving a certain number of deliveries per week. I think something like 1,000 letters, and that you would get a post office. So we see that Mr. Casaubon's letter was delivered to Dorothea by Mr. Brooke, right? Dorothea's reply was delivered early the next morning by Josh, who may have been a servant or the child of a servant, and who may or may not have had more than his feet for transport. So he could have walked a 10-mile journey to perform his duty. First the 5 miles to Lowick, then he has to wait because Mr. Casaubon asked him to hang on while he writes a reply, and then he has to walk back and give the reply to Mr. Brooke to say that Mr. Casaubon would dine at their home that evening. And so I've chosen this painting because I think it kind of illustrates it. I think this young woman here is quickly scribbling a reply to a letter in order to give it to the man that is standing just outside the door talking to the servant there. She's quickly scratching down a reply. So like Mr. Casaubon, she's living in the country, and she knows that if you get somebody and they deliver you a letter and it's quite urgent and you want to pen a reply, you quickly scribble something down, seal it up, and you give it to the person so they can take it back where they came from. Now, Mr. Casaubon does live close enough, of course, that he could drive from Lowick and he could make his proposal in person, but he doesn't. Now, at first I thought that might be a sign of coldness, but then I backed up and I thought, wait a second. Given how Mr. Brooke has already reacted to Dorothea's apparent enthusiasm for the possibility of being proposed to by Mr. Casaubon, I wonder if Mr. Brooke advised Mr. Casaubon to put his proposal in writing. Why? Because Dorothea, she may seem older than her real calendar age, but she is under 21. And that means she was still considered a minor, and she could not accept a marriage proposal herself unless her guardian first approved the possibility. A written proposal would allow Mr. Brooke a little bit more time to sort of advise Dorothea and protect her in case she wanted to turn it down. So I take it back. At first I thought, oh, Mr. Casaubon, I mean, how cold, how aloof. And then I thought, no, actually, it wouldn't surprise me if Dorothea's uncle, who I get the impression and I think I get even more the impression as I read chapter 5, was really kind of hoping that she would marry Sir James Chetham. That there's something afoot in the family which is going to be kind of put off a bit, moved off center if she doesn't marry Sir James Chetham. So I wonder if he didn't ask Mr. Casaubon to put his proposal in writing, A, because that would look a bit more aloof, but also I think he was thinking, oh, surely Dorothea will have the sense to turn him down, and of course, good, I will advise her and help her with that, and then I will make sure that she is protected and does not have to see the man and do the refusal herself. Obviously, I will take her reply and go and, make my case to Mr. Casaubon. I will protect her. I'm her guardian. I think, though he may be a bit all over the place with his opinions, he does seem to have a sense of wanting to look after Dorothea's well-being. But, no matter how forgiving I am of Mr. Casaubon, it does not save his letter from being one of the least, how do I put it? I've read leasing finance agreements that were more romantic than Mr. Casaubon's proposal letter, right? It's a letter that almost needs one of those lists of definitions that you get at the start of contracts, or you need some terms and conditions in small print at the end. That's what the letter reminded me of. You'll see when I load the page on here, page 43, you'll see I've divided up the letter into chunks of text. And that's because I'm going to read the sections as they are, but I'm also going to give you my own Heather Reed's original translation into blunt English of what Mr. Casaubon is actually saying. So let's read part A. My dear Miss Brooke, I have your guardian's permission to address you on a subject than which I have none more at heart. I am not, I trust, mistaken in the recognition of some deeper correspondence than that of date, in the fact that a consciousness of need in my own life had arisen contemporaneously with the possibility of my becoming acquainted with you. For, in the first hour of meeting you, I had an impression of your eminent and perhaps exclusive fitness to supply that need, connected, I may say, with such activity of the affections as even the preoccupations of a work too special to be abdicated could not uninterruptedly dissimulate. And each succeeding opportunity for observation has given the impression an added depth by convincing me more emphatically of that fitness which I had preconceived, and thus evoking more decisively those affections to which I have but now referred. Okay. Blunt version. Your uncle said I could write and tell you what matters most to me. At the exact same time we met, I came to realize I had a need. I don't think this is just coincidence. You impressed me immediately as perfectly suited to supply my need. Also, there were feelings of affection. My work is so special that it should matter more than anything else, but in this case, there were lapses. Each time we met after that convinced me that my affection linked directly to your suitability to help me. Okay. Well, it'd be lovely if you commented on that. Maybe that's not the best translation, but I felt that's really what's being said here. Okay, let's go on now. Let me just grab page 43 and make sure that I'm going right to the bottom here. Yeah, and we'll read section B. Our conversations have, I think, made sufficiently clear to you the tenor of my life and purposes, a tenor unsuited, I am aware, to the commoner order of minds, but I have discerned in you an elevation of thought and a capability of devotedness, which I had hitherto not conceived to be compatible either with the early bloom of youth or with those graces of sex that may be said at once to win and to confer distinction when combined, as they notably are in you, with the mental qualities above indicated. It was, I confess, beyond my hope to meet with this rare combination of elements, both solid and adapted to supply aid in, gotta get page 44 up on screen really quick, graver labors, and to cast a charm, I'm trying to enlarge this while I'm reading, and to cast a charm over vacant hours, and but for the event of my introduction to you, which, let me again say, I trust not to be superficially coincident with foreshadowing needs, but providentially related thereto as stages toward the completion of a life's plan, I should presumably have gone on to the last without any attempt to lighten my solitariness by a matrimonial union. Okay, blunt translation of section B. Most people don't have the brains for my kind of work. You, I noticed, think and learn better. I didn't think that was possible in a young, beautiful woman. But I had no hope of getting any help with my work, let alone from someone attractive. I would have died alone, but I am telling you that God directed our meeting so that my needs could be met. Right. Section C. Such, my dear Miss Brooke, is the accurate statement of my feelings, and I rely on your kind indulgence in venturing now to ask you how far your own are of a nature to confirm my happy presentiment. To be accepted by you as your husband, and the earthly guardian of your welfare, I should regard as the highest of providential gifts. In return, I can at least offer you an affection hitherto unwasted, and the faithful consecration of a life which, however short in the sequel, has no backward pages whereon, if you chose to turn them, you will find records such as might justly cause you either bitterness or shame. I await the expression of your sentiments with an anxiety which it would be the part of wisdom, were it possible, to divert by more arduous labor than usual. But in this order of experience I am still young, and in looking forward to an unfavorable possibility, I cannot but feel that resignation to solitude will be more difficult after the temporary illumination of hope. In any case, I shall remain yours with sincere devotion, Edward Casaubon. Blunt translation of section C. That's how I see it. Do you see it the same way? God would be generous if you accepted me as your husband. What you would get is someone who has never loved anyone before, and so you get someone perfect because I haven't made any mistakes. Work is not distracting me from worrying about your decision, as it should. I'm like a baby when it comes to relationships. I will probably find it harder to accept being alone if you say no. I will close this letter with a socially conventional phrase that uses the word sincere. Okay, that is my blunt translation. Now, what is so amazing here, or maybe not, is Dorothea's reaction. Dorothea's reaction to what has been possibly the driest, least romantic document ever presented to a young woman as a romantic document. Dorothea trembled while she read this letter. The only thing I could think is that she was struggling to sort of deal with the syllables. But then she fell on her knees. And as soon as Eliot used that phrase, I thought, well, that is just this biblicalness of it. I fell on my knees, and I thought of all the times in the New Testament and the Old. I actually went back online, because you can get a Bible concordance online so easy, and I just put fell on her knees and waited for all the verses to come up. So she fell on her knees, she buried her face and sobbed. She could not pray under the rush of solemn emotion in which thoughts became vague. I think that was my biggest thing, was that, yes, this is describing something so powerful, so overwhelming, so ecstatic, that rational thought has shut down. What, of course, it made me think of right away, and I'm just going to bring this, bear with me while I, move this to the front, is, of course, the artwork, the statue of St. Teresa's Ecstasy, which I used, I think, as the thumbnail for the prelude of Middlemarch Meditations, where Teresa is just completely overcome by this divine, here it's showing an arrow hitting her in the heart. I've heard an art critic say that there's something not very subtly sexual about the image, but she's completely overwhelmed. There's nothing rational is going on in Teresa's head right now. She's simply, she couldn't put a sentence together. And this seems to be where Dorothea is at the moment. That overwhelmed by the emotion of it all. So she remained in that attitude till it was time to dress for dinner. I was trying to work out how much time that would be, but I reckon that'd be at least a couple of hours that she just completely, overcome by a letter. I can't imagine overcoming anyone with emotion, but that's the thing. She's not reacting to the letter. It took me a while to sort of think about that until Eliot said, how could it occur to her to examine the letter, to look at it critically? And I thought, Yes, she's not doing that. That is not where her reaction is. And Eliot goes on to say her whole soul was possessed by not the letter itself, but the fact that a fuller life was opening before her. The fantasy that we have watched her constructing about what life will be like if she were married to Edward Casaubon, that fantasy is what she's reacting to. The letter is a trigger. It's a trigger that says, yes, you can take that fantasy now and consider it reality. She has no rational basis for that, but then she's not rational right now at all. She simply there's almost like she set a trip switch that will flip the minute she hears Edward Casaubon propose marriage, and then she's just going to allow her fantasies to come roaring in and take over what is normally a much more rational, cautious mind, but not now. There isn't a rational bone in her body at this particular moment in the book. What I do like at the top of page 45 here is how Eliot's so careful to remind us that she is a 20-year-old sheltered middle-class woman in the 1830s. She talks about Dorothea's, this hope was not unmixed with the glow of proud delight, the joyous maiden surprise that she was chosen by a man whom her admiration had chosen. So, okay, maybe even us more sophisticated modern women remember the moment when the person that we really liked said that they liked us. There's always, when you're in young womanhood, there's always something kind of electric about that. I think it's electric on both sides, but I haven't specifically asked if, but with certainly girlfriends, we talk amongst each other, so we all know that strange level, that frisson. Amazingly, they fancy you back, because you never quite think that's going to happen. Anyway, where are we now? So I'm going to go down here to the next paragraph. After dinner, when Celia was playing an air with variations, a small kind of tinkling which symbolized the aesthetic part of the young lady's education. It made me think, actually, that because they went to a Swiss finishing school, I just thought, what kind of student was Dorothea then? Obviously, Celia did the aesthetic part. It sounds as though their education had an aesthetic part and a more academic part, but I'll talk about the academic later. Obviously, Celia excelled and did very well in all these little aesthetic things, what people would consider accomplishments in a young woman. But at any rate, Dorothea went up to her room to answer Mr. Casaubon's letter. Why should she defer the answer? She wrote it over 3 times, not because she wished to change the wording. Again, an indication that there's still no critical thinking happening here. She's not worried about exactly how she says it, but because her hand was unusually uncertain, that is, her handwriting, and she could not bear that Mr. Casaubon should think her handwriting bad or illegible. And of course, that's because of his eyesight. She's thinking about that. She's thinking, oh my God, she wants to save his eyes. So 3 times she wrote, just for neatness alone, my dear Mr. Casaubon, I am very grateful to you for loving me and thinking me worthy to be your wife. I can look forward to no better happiness than that which would be one with yours. If I said more, it would only be the same thing written out at greater length, for I cannot now dwell on any other thought than that I may be, through life, yours devotedly, Dorothea Brooke. Well, if I did a blunt translation of that, and it's a pretty short letter, so it's already getting pretty close to blunt, my blunt translation would be, my dear Mr. Casaubon, I am not worthy of you. Your happiness matters, nothing else. I'd only repeat myself if I kept on writing. I can't think of anything but devoting myself to you. Okay. I've got to be careful not to let my age show, going, oh my God, this is the worst possible. Anyway, let's just let things happen. That's the point of fiction, isn't it? So later in the evening, she followed her uncle into the library to give him the letter, that he might send it in the morning. He was surprised. Okay. But his surprise only issued in a few moments' silence, during which he pushed about various objects on his writing table. That's lovely. And finally stood with his back to the fire, his glasses on his nose, looking at the address of Dorothea's letter. Have you thought enough about this, my dear? Oh, he's trying so hard. And she says, there was no need to think long. You feel like saying, Mr. Brooke, Dorothea didn't think. Can we just let you know? Thinking stopped the minute she opened that letter from Mr. Casaubon. She hasn't done any thinking since then. things are in a different state, okay? Anyway, she says, I know of nothing to make me vacillate. If I change my mind, it must be because of, here we go, something important and entirely new to me. Right, everybody make a note, because I said, does this foreshadow anything? Are we just waiting now for her to, something important and entirely new to her, to come and change reality in a big, big way? But for now, we'll leave her in her illusion. Now, I'm doing a little bit of page 46, and I'll tell you this is only because really there's kind of a natural cutoff point in the middle of this chapter. Mr. Brooke goes on in, futilely, but he doesn't know that. He says, have you accepted him? Then Chettam has no chance. Has Chettam offended you? Offended you, you know. What is it you don't like in Chettam? And then she says, there is nothing that I like in him, said Dorothea. And I love this next statement. Mr. Brooke threw his head and shoulders backward as if someone had thrown a light missile at him. So, and then I thought of the St. Teresa statue again. Like, there's Mr. Brooke's St. Teresa moment. He's just like overwhelmed with this response. And Dorothea, of course, she realizes, maybe it's a bit blunt, and she tries to take it back the way she did with Celia in the previous chapter. Like, oh dear, I've been blunt again. She says, I mean in light of a husband. He is very kind, I think, really very good about the cottages, a well-meaning man. So Mr. Brooke, he goes on and talks about, you must have a scholar, and talks again about how he used to really like knowledge and tried to be a scholar, but, he wonders whether that was a good idea. However, my dear, I have always said that people should do as they like in these things up to a certain point. I wonder what that certain point will be for Mr. Brooke. I've heard rumors that he has a point. He seems such an easygoing man, but I've heard that he has a boundary. We just haven't reached it yet. I couldn't, as your guardian, have consented to a bad match, but Casaubon stands well. His position is good, and here's the crux. I am afraid Chettam will be hurt, though, and Mrs. Cadwallader will blame me. And you can see my little margin notes, dump, dump, dump. I just think, okay, something's coming now. It's like Dorothea has lit a fuse, and there's going to be some kind of neighborhood kerfuffle. I'll use the nice word, feud, because of what she has decided to do. But there we go. I'm going to leave the rest because I just feel that there's something more to be discussed in the next section. So the next meditation will take us up to the end of chapter 5, and we'll talk more about how Celia reacts to the news. Oh, that's everything, everybody. Tell you what, I've got 3 books on the go right now. I have got a biography of Gore Vidal by J. Parini. I think I mentioned it when I did the review of Myra Breckenridge. I have got Razorblade Tears, a thriller by S.A. Cosby, and I'm reading Watership Down by Richard Adams. So it's a lot. They're all ebooks, and I'm at various stages through them, not really ready to do a review yet. So I'm working on a little coffee break for Thursday. So look out for that. That's it, guys. Thanks so much for joining me again. Look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.